Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. Next on our list is our friend all the way from Ghana. Please put your hands together for Mr. Manasseh Azuri Awoni. Mr. Manasseh is the editor-in-chief, The Fourth Estate. Next on our list, the next panelist is the Chief Executive of DataFight in person of Mr. Joshua Olufemi, who will be joining us online. Please put your hands together for him. Last but not the least, I think he should be here anytime soon, is Mr. Ajibola Hamza. He is the editor, International Center for Investigative Reporting. Please put your hands together for him in absentia. All right, next, I'll hand it over to the moderator.
All right, thank you very much. First, you murdered my name, so I'll do well to correct that. All right, so welcome to this session of the 17th edition of the Africa Investigative Journalism Conference. This session is a timely one because we are going to discuss a pertinent issue, COVID-19, but more particularly spendings during the COVID-19. And for journalists who are interested in accountability, investigations, this is one of the critical areas that we are looking at when it comes to COVID-19 and then happenings within the area of journalism. My name is Jonas Nyabo, and I have an experts panel who will be helping me do the discussion. And as always, it's expected to be an interactive conversation. So I would encourage a lot of your questions either through the Hover app or on the Zoom platform. And even those who are in-house, you can have your questions so that our panel would help discuss those things. But again, let me just introduce my panel. We have Ajibola Hamzat, who will be here shortly, but Manasseh Awoni Azuri, who has been introduced earlier, is a Ghanaian investigative journalist. He is also the editor-in-chief of the Fourth Estate, a journalism project of the Media Foundation for West Africa, and he leads a team of young journalists to conduct very important public interest investigations, including in areas of human rights and then accountability. So he's, as you are aware, a very important person to talk to on an issue like this. Also with me here in-house is Ini Ekot. He is a deputy managing director at Premium Times, extensive experience in news reporting and investigations, and has uncovered a wide range of issues on themes of corruption, human rights, and then abuses in the environment. And we are told already that Joshua Olufemi, DataFight, is online with us as well, so we'll be getting to him to hear his remarks as well. He is the founder and chief executive of DataFight, a media research and data analytics company in Nigeria. So welcome, gentlemen. All right, so let me start with Manasseh. COVID-19 for journalists across the world has been an incident that has taken everyone by surprise. And for journalists, I'm sure before the year started, 2020, even to date, I'm sure you had plans of things you wanted to work on. How has that shifted your focus a bit on what you wanted to do for the year?
Well, generally, not so much. Some impediments were created that for a long time we couldn't travel. There was a story I was working on which I had to travel outside of Ghana. And just when after getting a visa, airports were closed. And not long afterwards, that country also introduced measures that meant that I couldn't travel. So obviously, such works have been stalled. And within Ghana, I got to a point that journalists couldn't move about freely. You couldn't book interviews with certain people in person. And with investigative reporting, a lot of the time, you need to go to people. It isn't every interview you can call people on the phone and speak with. So generally, journalism has been affected, but that shift also meant that we couldn't do away with the pandemic. which is COVID-19. And for a lot of people, the media was the only channel through which they could see what was going on across the world and even in their own country. And for us investigative journalists, we would want to look beyond the political public relations and how almost everybody wants to make political capital out of the pandemic. So it also meant that some of us had to do stories that were to the COVID-19.
Let me come to Inyekot. So at Premium Times, how did you plan to cover COVID-19? Again, like I said, it took everyone by surprise. But as journalists, as media house, you try to be proactive to make sure you cover all the bases to feed the right information to the public. How did you cover COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, at Premium Times, I mean, the disruption affected Premium Times, affected our coverage in a wide range of areas. It's something, I mean, it's one in a lifetime thing. This is not something that happens all the time, the pandemic I'm talking about. But the paper operationally has, managed to stay reasonably the way it should stay. At the time we had lockdown last year, of course, the operations were affected. Thank God for the virtual operations that we have. We've been able to continue to do what we have to do. There's been challenges in respect of areas like travels, sometimes maybe funding. The challenge that media generally faces when you talk about funding. But to a great extent, it's been under control. We have made effort and reasonably been able to implement a robust coverage of the pandemic. In terms of the daily routine stories of what's going on health-wise, in terms of investigation, following what government is doing, authorities, researchers, and all of that, up to areas like maybe following the spendings, following the money, how these things are done. So in summary, I think we've been able to move as it is.
Well, all right. So we just have joining us, Ajibola Hamzat. So maybe, I think we should put our hands together. So while he joins us upstage, while he does that, I want to go to Olufemi now on, for you at DataFight. So we are talking about COVID-19 spendings. Were there key points in terms of accountability that you envisaged were going to be key in the conversations about COVID-19 for you, and for which reason maybe you made some preparations to us?
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Sure. Essentially, there's a general history of mismanagement of funds from, public procurement to budget and all the rest. We knew that COVID-19 wasn't going to be a different story for Nigeria. We also knew immediately we had that some of the public procurement law, some components of the law will be relaxed because of the emergency and of course the purchases that had to be done quickly. That meant that a lot of due process will have to be relaxed such that governments and other officials can buy things to cover for the emergencies quickly. So that was already a red alert or a red flag for us to drive the work we were going to do. But the next question we asked ourselves was, if people weren't going to move around for us to be able to, monitor or verify if these purchases or these procurement were done following the new due process, how else were we going to go about this? And that was now the place where open data or public data that government was going to publish became the new tool or the new resource or source of information to use for the implementation. So that was primarily something we knew right on that we would need to rely on. And to get that done, one of the things we did was to reach out to other media organizations, including Premium Times, ICIR, about 7 of them. to say we need to use available data to investigate this together. As much as possible, that brought some level of collaboration, but that was like how we, went first into making COVID-19 spending, tracking or investigation a project for our organization.
That's a very important point about collaboration, and I'm sure we'll be discussing that going forward. But I want to come to Ajibola as well on how you also plan to cover or focus on spendings during COVID-19. Systems, there were a lot of disruptions. There were also systems were compromised in terms of some rules relaxed so that it's an emergency, so that a lot of things could be done, especially in terms of procurement processes. Did you see this as a red flag, and how did you plan to cover this to make sure there is transparency and accountability?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonah. I agree so well with what just because we worked together on a number of stories when we got access to the open data. But ICR in particular actually worked on 3 important stories. And those 3 stories, when we're looking at the data, it became very clear to us that the MDAs, that is the ministry and the other agencies of the government, they are not being open enough, despite all the promises, the guidelines, and the laws that they've made to say that they're going to allow the spending of the COVID-19 money to be transparent. And I'll give you an example. In fact, the leading agency, NCDC, no, let's even start with the primary healthcare department, development agency. That is one of the key agencies of the government that is expected to lead the fight against COVID and using the public money to do that. The first instance, looking at the data, what we found was that some of the projects that they contracted out, the prices were inflated. About 4 companies in particular were given some contracts, something close to 200 million worth of contracts were given to these 4 MDAs. And each and every one of them, they were shooting the price of the items because the contract requires that the supplies of medical supplies and other stuff that were needed. These companies, when they were going to be buying those, they were quoting more than 200% higher than the market price. I'll give an example of the infrared thermometer, for instance, because that is one of the medical supplies that were supposed to be made at that time. Primary healthcare department, the department agency were buying that at between 80,000 and 85,000 per one. At that time, the thermometer was being sold between 20,000 and 25,000. In fact, we checked the Jumia. We went ahead to check even the what's the name of this American Amazon. The highest on Amazon, because we're looking for the highest of the thermometer then. It was, when we calculated, it was about 50,000 in Nigerian money. So, but agency of the government were buying at 85 and above. And that was what we saw throughout of the contracts that they awarded. It was not, even the NCDC, the Bureau of Public Procurement came out with a guideline that time and said that, look, even though we are not going to allow all the agencies of the government to follow the normal process of contract this time around because of the emergency of the situation, but what is going to happen is that before you do anything at all, there must be a procurement plan. Yeah. And that procurement plan must be submitted before a single cover of the government is going to be, allocated or disbursed. But guess what happened? Each of the agencies were procuring without a single procurement. At least we didn't see anyone because there's a platform where you're supposed to submit all the procurement you are making. The law requires that you must do that no single cover will be made available. But that is what is happening.
And were these being done before COVID?
No.
Some of these, compliance to some of these procurement laws or practices?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a BP, which was a 2007 law. Now that's one. But the guidelines were, implemented during the COVID when they realized that, look, we're going to need a lot of money to really combat COVID, and we're going to need this money to come from everywhere. So that was how they set up the arrangement with the Nigerians under COVID. So private Nigerian companies were bringing money. The foreign agents were bringing money. And then even the government made supplementary budget on COVID. So money was coming from everywhere. So BP realized that, okay, for us to be able to track the spending of this funding, one of those things that we need to do is to put up a guideline of how the money will be spent, which was a very beautiful document anyway, because at least it spelled out how agencies of the government should be able to attract the people in the custody of the fund. But each of that guidelines was applied in breach, considering what we found across board.
That's very interesting. So you talk of the monies that are coming in. These are huge money. So the IMF, for instance, over $3 billion. Yeah. That's for Nigeria. I think Ghana is about $1 billion as well for COVID-19 related procurement and other activities. And this came at a time when both economies, for instance, were sort of, growth was very slow. Yeah. So Manasseh, for you, how did you experience something like this in terms of monies coming in and what you see doesn't appear to be proper accountability for these monies that are coming in, some of which were not free?
Okay. When COVID struck and they were running helter-skelter, I put up a post on Facebook. And my post said, whenever there's a pandemic, corruption becomes endemic. So the officials who are spending our monies should know that one day will ask questions. And at the time, I had a lot of attacks from the usual pro-government foot soldiers who said, well, they are trying to save the country and all you are always looking at is how much is being spent and all of that. But it didn't take long for us to actually realize that they were going to abuse the monies that were coming in. And just by way of a background, if you take procurement corruption out of Ghana, then there might be no corruption at all. Because almost all the corruption, apart from the natural resources contracts that are sometimes misused and all of that, a chunk of our corruption is in the area of procurement. And we have a procurement law, and the drafters of the law were very intelligent. They knew that there are circumstances that wouldn't allow for the normal process of tendering. So they made provision for pandemics and disasters that certain contracts that could have gone through public tendering, open tender, were allowed to go through restricted tendering because the process is short, but you must justify. But quite a number of things happened that really we realized that the monies were misused. If you're going to Ghana, you'd have to do a test. And before I was in Germany in January, and before I came to Ghana, I was supposed to test before I could board. I went to do the PCR test and I had my money. I said, no, we will test you. And then we don't care about the money first. The second time, the flight delayed. So I had to do another test. In both cases, I didn't pay. But in my own country, Ghana, I had to pay $150 US. And I was with my wife. So the two of us paid $300. And you have to pay the money in Germany before you are even allowed to board, because your own country doesn't trust that when you get there, you'll be able to do it. Now, that's not a problem. In other countries, we heard that this antigen test could have been done for up to between 20 and 30 US. In Egypt and others, we read that they were doing it for 30 US. So why is it that in Ghana, we're paying 150 US? Later, ECOWAS met and they realized that no, it was so much. So now ECOWAS citizens, I'm told, to pay $50 for the antigen test. But that's not all the problem. The circumstances under which this company, Frontiers Health Services, nobody in Ghana knew about the company. The company only resurrected when our borders were to be opened and people must test, because we had the Noguchi and other private testing facilities. None of them was given this contract. When we started asking questions, we realized that this company was even formed in the Virgin Islands somewhere, and they said the person fronting is a Nigerian who has very close links to the office of the president. And normally when it comes to corruption, Ghana and Nigeria, I always say that Nigeria is bigger, but
smaller corruption.
Yes, but this is one of them. Then we also had the first vaccine that we had to procure ourselves. And by way of a shameful background, our very first COVID-19 test kits and PPEs was a donation. Then when it came to the vaccine, the very first one was also a donation. Ghana has made only one attempt to be able to procure our own vaccine, the Sputnik vaccine. And that was there when some journalists in Norway contacted me that they had a story that concerned Ghana, and so they wanted me to help investigate. So myself and one other journalist in Ghana helped the VGDI in Norway to do this investigation. And the Ghanaian government was procuring vaccines, the Sputnik vaccine, from Russia. But it decided to use a middleman in Dubai. And that was not just the problem. The vaccine, a dose, was going for $10 in the international market. But we went through this middleman and we're paying $19 per dose.
That's nearly 100%.
Nearly 100% increase. Now, when we did this story, the Norwegians, we helped them, we published this story. It became a very huge issue in Ghana. Parliament had to do a probe, and the Minister of Health actually appeared before the committee and admitted he breached the procurement law. This was supposed to be an international contract that should have gone through Parliament. Nothing of that sort was done. A lot of laws were breached, and in the end, he mentioned that, well, we're not in normal times, so he wasn't thinking straight while going through these processes. And at the end of the day, there was a groundswell call for the president to dismiss the health minister. Unfortunately, the president went to the health minister's home region and decided to make a joke out of this. So this is another one. There's also one which I personally
let's hold it there. Let's hold it there and then come to Idioko. So from Manasseh's narration, we have incidents of sort of justifiable reason that one, we are not in normal times. Two, if you are procuring through a middleman, obviously you are going to have some percentage increase. So how do you, as a media house, draw that distinction to say, no, this is something that looks like corruption, and something that's in a pandemic, I mean, it's normal for something like this to happen?
Yeah, thanks. For us, the rules don't change if you are talking about coverage of corruption. And if someone takes government money or diverts or does not deliver on a contract, it is something we have to report. I mean, if you say because of a pandemic, we have emergency rules, for instance. In Nigeria, for instance, you have the BPP, providing new guidelines, like Jibola explained. So the expectation is that those who are handling these projects or these public activities are supposed to follow that rule. So the media at that level, you can say, okay, perhaps we can hold them to that relatively new standard, But unfortunately, I think the situation here, and maybe in Ghana and other countries, is one that whether it is the new emergency rule or the previous one, it stayed almost the same. We had cases of very present violation of the law, corruption, and we had a very interesting case also. A state in the North Central, matter of fact, Kogi State, where the government itself did not believe in COVID. he did not believe there is something called COVID. So when you asked the governor about what the government is doing, his response at the time was that we have an app. So the government developed an app to track cases of coronavirus.
It wasn't
infection.
free, I'm sure.
Sorry?
That app wasn't free, I'm sure.
So that's where the story is, you know. So it turned out that when we eventually, were able to lay our hands on the audited report of, government expenditure on how the government spent COVID money, we saw that the app that the government developed, the government spent about 90 million naira to get that app. So our team members went to the company and inquired how much it would cost to get that same app, not knowing that, of course, it's journalists or something.
Yeah.
So, and the app we were given or offered at 300,000
Wow.
naira.
Same company.
The same company. So it's not even nothing relative. So when the story came out, of course, the government tried to scramble some kind of response. Eventually, the government said they only spent, in the real sense of it, they spent only 890,000 or thereabout naira.
And the remaining?
So the remaining, as we are speaking now, we don't know what happened to that. So we're talking about multiple ways of people taking advantage of a terrible situation to steal money. Not that they are stealing or they are diverting as a novel practice. It's something that happens. But of course, one would think that considering what we have at hand now, that perhaps maybe common sense would prevail. So we have inflation of contract. You have situations where projects are not delivered. You have situations where the government says we have made certain payments, maybe transfer of money to people, maybe farmers or something, and you try to track these folks and say, did you get some money? And they say no. So we have multiple, ways where that these things happen. So
I want us to would later go into details about tracking the distribution of palliatives and relief packages. But I want Joshua to tell us about how do we circumvent this whole situation where it appears government is like the sole body or the sole source of information for some of these things, because we don't have perhaps the tools or some skills because of COVID-19. We don't have access to certain tools to be able to probe into some of these procurement or these purchases. So I don't know if Joshua is still online. If you can help us understand some of the tools or processes you go through to get information on to track COVID spending.
I mean, officially, we still rely so much on the data that government provides. On the other hand, some of which you heard Ini and Ajibola speak about, you also use, do your own undercover or make your own online searches to find out what other sources of information are saying vis-a-vis or in comparison with what government is saying. So there are different ways you can mine data online to verify, what government is saying vis-a-vis any project or even any kind of policy decision that government is making. But when you're reporting issues of COVID-19 spending, you still have to rely, because what we're investigating is what they told us they spent or what they told us that they've received. For instance, it was easy to get how much government has received from other governments because other government or other international institutions published what they were going to give to these governments for as loan or as relief packages. So that's another way. More or less, you still have to use the internet as a resource. You've got to use open source intelligence tools to help you gather information. Important thing to learn or to note is how best to ensure that when you get the data, you're making the best use of them in terms of how do you clean it to be suitable for the story you want to tell or the investigation you're about to do. I guess that's what it's more important for journalists who asking the question, how can I do the kind of story that Data Fight or every other investigative platform is doing? Is how do I ensure that the data that I have access to, whether from what bank, any other platform, government platforms in Nigeria or everywhere else, how do I ensure that it serves the purpose of my own storytelling or on uncovering corruption or every form of malpractice?
But would you think that in your case, the Nigerian government was very clear and transparent about all the monies it has received? We are talking of maybe the CBN's platform for making public the names of all donors and all that. Did you find that information useful, or was it adequate?
It was useful, but it was inadequate, if I can say that, because they weren't providing all the information that was needed. They were not timely, but they provided it anyways, and it was useful. For instance, the Open Treasury portal, where government keeps information about its spendings, every money that has been spent above 5 million naira, was very useful for us to know who really was paid what. But the challenge with the platform was there were instances running to billions of naira, even billions of dollars. You didn't have description for the payments that were made. So it was difficult to connect those payments to procurement or COVID-19 spending. You also had the Bureau of Public Procurement also providing a specific platform for COVID-19 spending, but they weren't up to date. Some of them were not good enough. And then when the budget was revised to cater to some of the needs for COVID-19, that was also very useful. So in terms of use, they were useful, at least for our investigation. The Corporate Affairs Commission website was very handy because you could then verify if the companies that were mentioned as contractors were even registered companies in the first place, or they were just companies that came out of the blues just for the purpose of COVID-19 contract. And that was very, very useful, especially for some of our investigations. One showed how, you had to the tune of about, I think about 326 million naira, given as contracts to companies that didn't exist, and things like that happened during that period. And that was because the Corporate Affairs Commission website was useful to verify if these companies existed in the first place, or even if they were, they met the requirement to be public contractors or contractors to governments in the first place.
So let's come to Ghana. So Manasseh, in Ghana, a few significant things. So first, the main vehicle that's driving the COVID-19 relief fund, there was a COVID-19 relief fund where donors, private individuals and companies put in fund to be used for various projects, and also private sector-led project to construct an infectious disease center. Did you find the information that was put out useful in terms of those who are donating? Were there suspicious names? Were they being transparent to the amount they were given and things like that?
Well, when we look at the funding and expenditure, what came through the private sector fund or private sector-led activities was just a fraction, a minute fraction of what was spent, because almost all budgets of ministries, departments, and agencies, all the budgets were redirected towards COVID-19. So with the committee the president set up to oversee the collection of these funds, I think what they got was about 60 million at the time when they made it public. That's close to about $10 million. So that was just a minute fraction. The bigger spending came from what IMF and the World Bank and other donors gave, in addition to the traditional budgets for ministries, departments, and agencies across the country. And I personally followed up to some of the expenditure, and then I didn't get an answer. Prior to this year, last year, Ghanaians were all clamoring for the right to information law. It has been passed, but when it comes to the implementation, I wrote to the Ministry of Health to get information in August 2020, 2020, as I speak to you now, that information hasn't been given. I wrote to the Ministry of Education for COVID-19 fumigation. They decided to spray, which common sense and science did not support, but just for the optics. For instance, they closed down universities and all schools 4 days after Ghana recorded its first case. And so no single university or school had COVID-19 case. But 3-4 months later, when they were reopening these schools, they had to mix chlorine and go and pour in the streets and everywhere. So the question I was asking is, you shut down these facilities for 3 months, granted that you even had COVID-19 before they went. For all these 3 months that they were unoccupied, who was in the school cooking for the virus to survive all these months? But they decided to do that, and it was worth hundreds of millions of cedis. I wrote to the Ministry of Education 2020 August, 2021 August, after a number of follow-ups, I got the response, and the response said, well, that contract was not under us. The presidency was the one which implemented this particular contract. So these are just specific examples of how it was difficult to get information. In the heat of the pandemic, even the figures that the government was releasing the figures were not accurate. We had election in 2020, so everything was like a PR measure to let the government look good. So the number of deaths in Ashanti region, the president announced, gave an update, and then when we got the figures, somebody leaked a document, a report from that region to the national headquarters. And we realized that the figure that was quoted for the Ashanti region in the president report was just one third of the total number of deaths. So even when people were dying, there was an attempt to hide the number so that the case doesn't look so bad, to maybe create the impression that the government was not on top of issues. So when it comes to transparency, accountability, the figures and what they wanted to put out, what I call the PR, which was often covered live on television, was from what was coming from them. But if you went asking critical questions, how much did you spend to do this? How much did you spend to do that? Who got this contract? It was and is still almost impossible.
That's very interesting. So I'll still implore you, if you have questions, do put it in the comment box. So we'll be taking them maybe in the next couple of minutes. But let me come to you, Ajibola. What happened to the palliatives?
The story of palliative is another interesting story in Nigeria, because when the money for the palliative was provided and some items were brought, I mean, everyone who is a Nigerian will know that some of those palliatives were kept or locked up in some places for a very long time. And
would we know the reason?
Well, it was later found out that some politicians were trying to actually keep it so that they can use it for some
festival,
for some events that satisfy their interest. There was a particular senator or a lawmaker in Lagos who I know kept some of the palliative for her birthday gift. I mean, she wanted to share the palliative on her birthday as a gift to loyalists. So that was the story of the palliative. And when some Nigerians got to know that, hey, these palliative were kept in several parts of the warehouses in Nigeria, I think during the Hentas, some went there to go and boggle the warehouse and took what belongs to them. So that is the story of palliative.
No, you can go. Sorry.
So, but that's for the items that were bought. There were palliative money given to people as well. But again, the stories are in the media that the number of those who eventually got some of this money that government claimed they have shared out, there's a difference between the numbers that were recorded and the number of those who eventually got. I am talking specifically about cash transfer, for instance. We did a story about the cash transfer, even before the COVID. when you look at the statistic, because we were able to get some data. So when we look at the statistic, you realize that it is very skewed. Some places some states got more of those interventions from government than some other states. But that is...
Was this for the entire citizenry or some select groups?
No, it's meant for some Nigerians. Okay. But again, the question is that you are supposed to choose some numbers in different states. Say 200 in this state, 200 in this state, and then you realize that in some states, some 200 have gotten already, in some other states, maybe 50. Whereas everybody is supposed to be able to access that funding equally. So that was also part of the stories of the palliative. The one we did about the transportation, because there was also a palliative for transporters. Recently, we did stories across the 6 geopolitical zones in the country. And again, what we found out, I think it's about 4,500 for each state that were allocated. But again, most of the stories that we're getting from the drivers who were supposed to benefit from that funding was that many of them, they just put their name on the register, and that was the last thing they heard about the palliative. They never got the palliative. Some got, but many did not get. But again, how do you check? So the government have been very, very difficult to make some of these data very open so that Nigerians can look at them very critically and say that this is how much you said you have spent so far on farmers, on transporters, on other Nigerians, and how many of Nigerians eventually got this. That's, open. I mean, that data is not made open as one wants.
So let's come to you. So what does this speak to maybe the government's perception of a certain level of inadequacy in terms of resources of media houses or journalists to track some of these things, or it's just a wise way of they know, well, they just have to find a way to go around this to make some money for themselves?
Well, I think I will go with the second. Yeah, I mean, if we understand how the issue of corruption is endemic in the country, so if we understand how bad it is, naturally the second is the way. In Nigeria, we used to say that Nigerians have short memory, that if you just...
It's the same in Ghana.
Okay, so...
Our former president actually said it.
Very good. So it's the government, make no mistake, the government understands that. I mean, people will just make noise and, after a while, maybe these things blew away. So it's not a matter of the government, either the government or the media not having the capacity to, provide data. I think it's just a deliberate refusal of the government to make this information available to citizens as they are supposed to do. I think a few days ago, last week rather, senior official minister of state, the humanitarian ministry said the government would not release the data of those who received the transfers, the monies that were sent to them, because they want to first of all almost like say declassify, like to say they are picking out sensitive information before they make that available. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Absolutely does not. It is not government's money. It is the Nigerian people's money. And they have the right to demand accountability. They have the right to ask questions. If you say you are giving 500 people money, and I want to know who are the 500 people. And if I'm supposed to be a beneficiary and I'm not getting the money, I should be able to ask, who did you give? So the ordinary citizen is not able to put these issues out to the government. That's the duty of the media, to help, to ask questions, to bring. And the government should be able to make this data available, but that's a difficulty. No question about that. We've sent FOI, requested, sometimes you even request unofficially, ask for data, ask for information. You want to, follow how these things were spent. In most cases, you don't have responses. You don't have the answers that, we need to do the kind of job that we should do. So the alternative to journalists would always be perhaps to try to create your data in the sense that, you get around, ask people, interview people, and have a sense of, the reality compared to what the government is telling us. So the problem of data is a serious problem. Sorry, maybe a little digression. I read a story a few days ago. Of course, it's in the United States, police are winning story. So I was just trying to, say, let me take my time to model how these journalists, got the bits of this story. So, and then compare, for instance, with where we are to say, if you need this particular information, where do you get it from? So you just see that this information, the journalists could get them. Federal data, federal records, government records, and all of that. I mean, that does not mean journalists are going to sit down and expect government to pour out everything. But that's, first of all, government's responsibility. If you are paying out funds, you should let people know how these funds are distributed and all of that.
Let me come back to you, Ajibola. So there are different levels or tiers when it comes to this corruption discussion. So there are issues, especially when it comes to the distribution of relief packages and palliative, for instance. There is one aspect where people believe that the distribution was actually done, but it was done on the partisan basis. And there is the other aspect of it was distributed evenly, but some governments underdeclared the number of, they underdeclared the amount that they give out. Which of them triumphed, or which of them was in a majority based on the work that you've done?
Well, I've not done the measurement of which one is in the majority and which one is not, but I think the two cases are possible. I mean, present in Nigeria. So you have the cases of underdeclared a resource that were distributed or disbursed to people. In fact, you see that more often than not. And that's the reason why you really do not see them wanting to release some of these documents. Ordinarily, these are public documents. If you are spending money on my behalf, I would like to know how you're spending that money. I would like to know how much of that money you spend, because it is not your money in the first place, it is public money. So that information is supposed to be made public. And Nigeria signed the Freedom of Information Act law in 2011, about 10 years ago. That law prescribes that every agency of the government that keeps public information should make that information available. You don't even need to ask for it. That information should be out there. It is those one that you think that people need to now request that we should not be going John don't need all the time to go and be asking for information that's supposed to be in the public domain in the first instance. But that's the case that we have in this country. The second leg of your question was those one who actually feel that they were not included on partisan basis. That is also possible. I mean, Nigeria is just like the US now. We are politically divided. So we have those ones who believe that they are in the opposition, they are not part of the present government, and therefore whatever this government is doing will not come to them first. So you have those ones. And then you have those ones who are in the government, who support the government, who will do anything to support the government and all that. So when they are sharing public funds or whatever that is coming from the government, it is expected that the leaders of the party in different wards or locality will ensure that they take care of their own loyalists first. And they do it in order to serve the interest for the next election. So it's something that also happens very regularly, because they know that these are the bargaining chips that you use in order to get more elections in the next cycle.
Interesting. So we'll be rounded up shortly, but Joshua, so we are still in the COVID period, and a lot of these things we've discussed may still be ongoing. How do we champion the cause as journalists to ensure utmost accountability to citizens in the area of COVID-19 spending? And also, how much of an importance or a priority should we give to collaboration, as you started mentioning, to address such an issue?
Okay, thank you. Interesting questions packed into one. I think the first one is to increase our level of, on the ground reporting that we do now that we're able to move around. Of course, stay carefully. I think it's time to go to the field and match data with money, for lack of a better way to describe it. So we want to go and see those projects that we couldn't go out because of the rampage. Now we can go and verify. Now we can go and see what, various MDs, ministry departments and agencies of government said they spent the money on. I mean, a lot of money was spent on buying computers. I don't know what you needed that to do for COVID-19. A lot of textbooks were also bought for COVID-19 as part of COVID-19 spending when schools were already shut. I mean, so
are these COVID-19 textbooks?
Yeah, you wonder whether that was to train COVID-19 to go or something. But I mean, it's time to go find out where those textbooks are, where those computers are, where other things that didn't really matter to COVID-19, but COVID-19 money was used to do, are going. I think that's the first layer. And the second one, which is the question you asked about collaboration. For me, in one of the things I wrote in the book by PTCIJ around how do we post Panama Papers, what was the way to go for Nigerian journalism? I'd said that we need to innovate competition. And the way to innovate competition is to collaborate. You have journalists across the country. And why do you need to spend about 100,000 naira, traveling down to the location of a project when you have journalists in that same location that you can collaborate with? I think that it's high time we begin to take that as important, not only for security or safety of the journalist, but as a way to beautify and, better make the story, great, working together. And we have examples almost every other year. ICIJ is showing us that collaboration empowers and makes storytelling or investigation impactful. I mean, Panama Papers, Paradise Paper. Now we have the Pandora Papers. So it's important that we see the value in collaborating as journalists, and the best way to start is to take the opportunity of COVID-19 investigations as a way to go. Sometimes what you need to collaborate is resources such as, oh, I'm a newspaper. I don't know anything about broadcasting. How can I collaborate to broadcast a newspaper to build my work? Or how can I ensure that this my story, which I have a platform with just a 1,000 followers, how can I collaborate with other newspapers that have 1 million following to help amplify the same great story that I've written with a small platform? So collaboration across platforms, medium, and resources is what I think we need to take serious. And globally, we have examples. I think that, I mean, this is an Africa-wide conference. I think that cross-border is something we should begin to look at. COVID-19 it's a global pandemic. I've not seen much of maybe just one or two across Africa where you have cross-border or transnational investigative reporting being done. I think ICR is the only one I've seen in Nigeria take that take that forward, collaborating newspaper outside of Nigeria to work. And so African journalists need to collaborate. We have similar problems. We have similar, pathetic politicians running our economies. And so we can bring it together and create fantastic things around it.
Very interesting point. So let me come to you, Manasseh. I don't know if anyone wants to comment first on what he said on collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Joshua. He's laid it out very clearly. But one thing I just would like to point out is that it's not going to be totally possible to remove the spirit of competition, from what we do, journalism. So, I mean, I'm just trying to be real in that sense. So there will always be that competition, but we cannot overemphasize how important it is for us to collaborate. If not for any other thing, then for these kinds of, public interest situations or stories or investigations, it is something, journalists, African journalists, or I mean, anywhere else, the same thing, have to do more. It helps, like he said, even in terms of, the convenience, the cost, and of course the impact, more importantly. I totally agree with him. That's the point.
So apart from the tension of commercial interest that is driving the activities of different newsrooms, because I mean, as Hidden mentioned, different newsrooms have their own commercial interest. And when you are fighting for the same, I mean, you're looking for the same money from the same place, and then the spirit of competition comes in. Another challenge that kind of made collaboration a little bit problematic in this country is also the ethics of the practice. I mean, all these things that we're talking about, politicians and our leaders, you also cannot understand this thing outside the ethical flaw of the media institution, because journalists themselves have their own issue.
Yeah.
There are some newsrooms that you would not want to probably share your very sensitive investigation with, because if you do that, that same newsroom or that same individuals in that newsroom will compromise the integrity of your report. So those are the kind of things that also make a collaboration very, very difficult, I think. But I mean, as Joshua said, it's a wonderful thing to do if we need to move journalism forward in this country.
That's very good. I think we can put hands together. The room is very all right. But I want Manasseh to touch on impact. So Ini talked about impact. So all this work that journalists have done in terms of trying to ensure accountability, for instance, some of these things still go on anyway. So how do journalists balance their expectations about the work that they are doing and also ensuring that they don't just do the work of pushing government to be accountable, but actually ensuring that indeed they become accountable?
Well, there is so much, only so much that the journalist can do. And a lot of it has to do with the laws. In Ghana, for instance, it is only the Minister of Justice and Attorney General who has the power to prosecute maybe criminal cases. And just recently, the Office of the Special Prosecutor was created by the Akufo-Addo government. Our new president, or he's been there for long. When he was campaigning, he campaigned on anti-corruption and said he would create the Office of the Special Prosecutor. And the first special prosecutor that was appointed was somebody who was well respected as an anti-corruption crusader. He resigned last year, and guess what he said? He released a press statement and said the president is the mother serpent of corruption. So if there is no commitment from the top, and I say corruption cannot be fought from the bottom-up approach, it should be fought from the top. If this is an organization and the cleaners, the sweepers, the front desk people are all honest, but the MD is very corrupt, there's no way they can enforce it. But if the top is honest, they can force accountability downwards. So generally,
but I thought journalists deal with the masses. So if the masses obviously are in support of your cause, it could trigger some level of accountability.
Well, in my country, there's only one instance that I know the masses actually rose up and want their voices to be heard. And that's the law against LGBTQ+. Apart from that, they don't seem to care. Because sometimes the very people you are fighting for tend to gang up against you. And I've had a number of experiences. I have done stories that I've taken, and with the expectation, sometimes just do the work and hope that it happens. I've done stories that have taken 3 people to jail. One person was just arrested last 2 weeks, and he'll be going to court tomorrow in my latest investigation. In this story that I did with the Norwegian newspaper on the vaccine, eventually the contract was canceled. And then the money that had already been paid to the sheikh in Dubai was retrieved. So that is an impact. But in a number of cases, you don't get an impact. And everybody in Ghana knows that there's one company that I've done stories about since 2013. It is a waste management company, Zoom Lion, which is in bed with all the governments. Nothing happens. But once in a while, 2017, for instance, I did an investigation and they lost or a $74 million contract was canceled. But there are a number of such contracts that still go on. So to manage expectation, I always say that, look, do your work to the best of your ability. Let the public know. There is a statement that is attributed to our first president, Kwame Nkrumah, which says that one of the best ways to fight corruption is to incite public opinion against the act and the actors. And there are certain people who feel so embarrassed when they are exposed in a corruption scandal. For instance, our head of public procurement authority was dismissed and then barred from holding public office, I think between 5 or 10 years. That is some impact after I did a story which revealed that his own companies were taking government contracts and selling. But there's another angle that was discovered when the president referred a matter to the state investigative bodies. Close to $10 million of cash went through his bank account. And in a certain society, that man may have been in jail by now, but he's free. So if you want to look at the success of your journalism solely based on the impact, you are going to lose steam. You get so discouraged, and there may not be any reason for you to do the next story. So what I think is that let's continue to shine the light. And I just want to end by agreeing with my fellow panelists about the difficulty in collaboration. But sometimes you may not need to collaborate with a media house, but sometimes a particular honest journalist in that media house that you know, person-to-person basis, because of conferences of this nature, if I need information in Nigeria, I don't have to take an aircraft from Ghana and come to Nigeria. I know a number of credible journalists that if I call them and say, look, there's this property we have found here where they say belongs to a certain name. Do you know this person? What does he do? And we can always work together. At the end of the day, I think journalism and investigative reporting is the only hope for our continent. The day Buhari announced his first ministerial appointment, I was in Nigeria, I was in Abuja here. And the newspapers, Buhari's men of integrity and all of that. Those of us who were monitoring from afar were so happy for Nigeria. I don't think that that same thing is still happening. And with our own president, he came with the same goodwill. But I said it was like, there's a place in Ghana they call Circle, Kwame Nkrumah Circle. You can go and buy a mobile phone, pay for it, and when you get home, it's a bar of key soup, a bar of soup. So I said it was like, this is what was packaged for us Ghanaians, and then we bought it. So if we journalists do not stand up and continue to fight, nobody will fight for us. And we'll continue to be miserable as a people.
Okay, Ajibola, your final point. Yes.
The point that Manasi made is a very important point. I mean, journalists need to understand that this idea of journalism has solved all our problems. It's not a reality. Journalism cannot. Every institution has their own role. I think our job, I think it was Holos Jade who said this sometimes ago, that look, our job is to make sure that this information is available so that you won't say that you do not know. We want you to know that this is happening. Whatever you now use with that information, I mean, it's up to you. But the law does not prescribe that we should be the one who provide the information and the one to prescribe, I mean, to prosecute and to do the, I mean, judge whoever. Just try and do. But again, that's where the collaboration thing that we're talking about comes to place. If media houses can collaborate with other CSO to take some of the issues in the report further. If I did an investigation and I lay out everything, and then you have a CSO who is involved in this and take the advocacy further, you can mobilize the people to take the issue to those ones who are affected. I think that is the kind of collaboration that I think can also bring.
That's great. Because of time, we would have to just wrap up briefly. But I think the point generally is that let's continue shining the light on the the accountability processes and then the procurement and all that. So at this point, I'll just briefly, if there are a few questions in-house, if there are a few questions in-house, we'll take them and then we can wrap up this session. If there are any questions, maybe in the next 1 minute, we can do that. All right, so just introduce yourself. Yes, introduce yourself and then you can use the microphone.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes. Good afternoon.
Thank you for the discussions. So my question is, COVID-19 has already changed ways of activities. So for journalists, as the pandemic give us new ways in reporting issues that have not been reported before, and also going forward, as this pandemic open our eyes to new ways of seeing things in the community. Thank you.
Okay. Would anyone want to take that?
Sure.
I think it was a comment, right? Yes, just retreat your question.
Let's get it again. For sure, the pandemic has bring novel ways of also doing things. So as journalists, which ways can we say as this pandemic bring for us in looking at issues to be like that? Sorry, I don't know if you get me.
So I actually got his question the first. So my response to that, before COVID, we didn't know that you could actually do a lot of stories, important story, right in your room, on your desktop. It was COVID that forced us to have that understanding, because I mean, shoe leather reporting is very great, where you have to go everywhere and interview people and do all something. But during COVID, we could not go anywhere. Everybody was under lockdown. So there was no way you could go out that time, but still you needed to do your journalism, right? But people still did journalism. How did they do it? That was when many journalists was discovering the power of the open source tool.
Yeah.
So I think that is one way the COVID has affected the work that we do.
I believe maybe Joshua wants to just have a bite on this.
I mean, Ajibola started. I'd given a good response. It's impacted that it's impacted us so much that we now appreciate open source intelligence and its tools and technology for telling stories without going to places where those things happen. I mean, open data is another one, which is of course what drives our work at Data Fight. I mean, so the way to go about it is to always ask, do I need to go there? And that can always help us answer the question of what tools we can use to do the stories. And of course, also keeping a community of practice alive and asking questions, I think is one thing that I've seen has started to happen during the COVID-19. So journalists reach out more to even those people they thought were competition during the COVID-19. And I think we need to keep that alive as one thing that COVID had taught us and as an impact even within the community or within the industry.
Okay, if there's a final question, you can be behind the mic. I think Manasseh wanted to comment on.
Yes, I want to say beyond our work, one thing this pandemic has opened my eyes to is how vulnerable we are as a people. And Ghana is not so different from Nigeria. When it happened, we had to rely on aid to give us PPEs. We are about the only continent that did not produce vaccines. And when they were produced, we said they wanted to kill Black people. So a lot of people objected to even testing. And when the vaccine was ready and people were buying, we are still struggling to even make our first procurement. If this pandemic was as serious in Africa as it is in other countries, the story would have been worse than we are seeing. And in my country, I got to realize that we didn't even have the structures when it comes to even giving aid. When they had to share food, they would go to a market, be in trucks, and be throwing the food, prepared food to the people. So there are even no structures. When it comes, you don't even know how many people live in a particular area. So it has made me realize that we are more vulnerable and we are more disorganized than we thought.
So, Ini, so maybe your final thoughts on following the money with regards to COVID-19 expenditure.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the
Joshua?
the previous, the point, I think Joshua made that point before the question that came. So impact, if we have a story or we write stories and the government doesn't seem to respond, I mean, are we supposed to base our sense of fulfillment or success on what the government has done? Listening to Manasseh, I think Ghana reasonably has done better than Nigeria in terms of having response to stories that journalists do. I heard about people being dismissed or government launching investigation. That's very difficult to find here now. I don't know. Ajbola will agree with me. There are stories that I think the government or the authorities they know these guys are troublemakers. So just let them keep making noise and they keep moving away, which is a problem. That's difficult. The government, unfortunately, the very one that promised a very high degree of accountability, checking corruption. So if reports come out, nobody's really bothered about them. So they let them slide. But my point would be that journalists have a duty to keep on, just like we said,
shining the light,
and not just to say if you write one or two stories about that subject matter and there's no response, you leave it go. It is right, it is proper for us to keep doing the follow-ups and not give up. We're not saying do advocacy, but follow up when new issues come up or developments come up. I mean, you never can tell. Eventually, action will be taken. So it's just a little point I wanted to add on that.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, please let's do it briefly.
Thank you for the insightful and enlightening session. My question is on the issue of interest in terms of your media platform where you currently work, and then the issue of beat coverage and reportage. How do you navigate a situation where you probably have a story idea or you have an investigative idea you probably want to do that is related to your beats, and knowing that your media house does not have the plan to back you up and tells you, if you decide to go ahead with this story, we don't have the resources or the capacity to back you up or to protect you. And then your beat is on one side telling you, if you go ahead with this story, you'll probably be dropped from the beat or your name will be removed from the media list or anything. So how do you tend to go ahead?
Okay, I want Ini to take that, but I want the other question to also come in so that would. How many questions can I see? Okay, two more. All right.
Okay, good day, sir. My name is Kenny Gunyani. So in Nigeria, let's take for instance Nigeria, we have a lot of information that comes out in the day. So today there's something about this particular politician, tomorrow there's something about this particular government, next tomorrow there's just new information that we play with around the media, and each medium is trying to report what is most important to them. Now, as journalists, how do we deal with relevance? How do we deal with impact? The whole COVID story made so much relevance when we were in that season. Right now, if a journalist, as a person, if I pick any story about COVID, I am kind of still most likely going to compare if it's going to be important to the problem. And yet you want your story to drive impact, because most likely a budget story of yesterday or a Pandora paper of tomorrow, who knows, would be more important to read than your so-so 15 months undercover with COVID-19 in one particular thing. So how do you fight against or manage, let me use the word manage, importance of your story and trying to get relevance and trying to get impact from it?
All right, so the third question. So introduce yourself and then.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anjikule Idoko Emmanuel. I work with African Leadership Magazine. Actually, I didn't register for this conference, though I was passing to see a friend and I saw investigative journalism conference.
You're welcome.
I can't come here. I can't come here and I see this and I just leave because some of my friends are waiting for me at Barcelona Hotel. But I love investigative journalism. And in 2011, when I was doing my PhD in journalism, we were told if you want to be an investigative journalist, you have to be very careful. Yes, your life is always at stake. So my question now, if I am trying to investigate something, because these politicians, they will kill you, they will brutalize you. They will not only kill you, they will go down to your brothers and your sisters. So now, what do you have, or what are you doing in case of any of our colleagues is arrested, that is an investigative journalist? Do you have any mechanism to protect any journalist that is being arrested or is being malhandled, like what my sister just said now? If you are in the conventional media, if you are going there, your editor will tell you, please, I don't send you that one. You get? So what are we doing to protect those of us who have that zeal to expose these corrupt leaders? Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Manasseh will have some experiences to share on this, but I think you have a certain network of lawyers. Do you have that in Nigeria for legal aid or something for journalists?
Yeah, I'm not so sure for journalists, but I know there's a network of
let's have
lawyers to support, people who are not able to afford legal services or something.
Okay,
I think there's something like that.
Let's have the last question.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
My name is Abdullah Issa. I'm a journalist for Radio France International.
Okay.
Let me just go in first in French because we have French. No, I'm going from English after French, okay? Les fonds alloués, selon mon analyse, n'ont réellement pas servi. Preuve que ce soit au Ghana, au Niger, au Nigeria ou autres pays de la sous-région, la population souffre. Et face au silence des autorités, quel est le rôle exact d'une rédaction de journalistes? I'm going in English. I say the fund allocated according to my analysis have really not been used. COVID funds in Niger, Ghana, Nigeria. The proof that is the population so far. First, with the silence of the authorities. What's exactly the role of editorial staff?
Are you talking of support for journalists?
Yes.
Okay.
In Niger, for example, every day, the health minister, you have data in Difa, in Zender, Tawa, everywhere. But if I went in Zender, I just compare the data. Some people tell me they don't see any fund. For example, for transporter in Zender, you have data. But you see just 2 or 5 people that tell you, say, okay, I received small coins, but others in the other areas, nobody can receive funds. My role for journalists, for example, if I want to compare that data and the investigation I do for that area, exactly what I want to do. That is my question.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. So the first question, Ini, you wanted to address that. I think
I can respond to that. Yeah, the question about journalists not being supported by their maybe the editors or supervisors. I would say that if the explanation is that the organization is not able to fund or support that investigation or reporting, perhaps as a result of cost, that's okay. So on that note, I think what's available to you is to seek, with the understanding perhaps of your supervisor, alternative funding. It's everywhere. There are grants. And I encourage you, I encourage all journalists to, be open to that. Apply for those, like we have Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism, PTCIJ, ICIR, and lots of other organizations that support, independent or reportings that are of public importance. However, if for any reason a media house is opposed to a particular report for reason of interest, reason of maybe fear, even fear, I need to say that. Unfortunately, let me say it's unfortunate for you to be there. You should not be there. you have to just, be clear with that. And I'm encouraging you to work towards getting out of that place. There are places where you are really needed. You need to prove yourself. You need to work hard. Get the stories out. One of the key things or attributes of a journalist must be, their ability to face up to challenges, the courage, and a sense that dislikes injustice, abuse, and all stuff like that. So, sorry, I will wrap up. So the first one, no money, you can seek ways of funding. But if it is about that, forget about that, editor. Just find your way, get connected to networks of journalists that, could encourage you to work, do some good, important reporting, and then eventually get yourself out of that. Then, if you permit me, I just want to say one small thing.
10 seconds.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. The aspect of relevance. I think that's the second question. How do we do about that? Well, unfortunately, it is the reality. It goes back to the aspect I said earlier, competition. If you are talking about Pandora papers now, everyone wants to have Pandora papers. It drives traffic. And of course, media practice is not like, you have to also have consideration for the financial aspect of it. We need to fund what we are doing, but it is something that worries me as a person, that we seem sometimes not to pay sufficient attention to the real things that affect the ordinary people. An example is health, education, poverty, inequality, things like that. So if we are on those issues and we are reporting them, unfortunately, they are not coming up, maybe because of editorial judgment or something or direction. I encourage you to just keep doing them. And just the same as I said, try to partner with other journalists. Eventually, those stories should be out. Please do not be discouraged. Thanks.
Manasseh, investigative journalism, quite scary because sometimes you may have nothing to fall on. Your media house may not be able to support you. How do you go about this?
Yes, I think I would want to refer to the advice Ini gave on the inability to publish or even get funding. So it is with threats. I have had to go out of the country 2 times because of threats, death threats I received. And the Media Foundation for West Africa was very instrumental. When I first went, I was working for my media house, but Media Foundation for West Africa was the one that arranged. So there are such institutions and organizations. I would also want to add that with the legal and other threats, you may have to explore such external factors. Once you get into this trade or business, Ghana used to be very free, but at a point I had to be given 2 police escorts. So I'm driving and have armed police in my car because I was threatened with deaths and all manner of things. So that danger is that the bad people are more united and connected than the good ones. So I will say that don't just give up so easily. You take the personal precautions, but try as much as possible to lean towards organizations and media groups. And when you are threatened, to don't make it a silent issue. Please get your colleague journalists to publicize it, because sometimes that also serves as a cover. It becomes a national issue, and the government knows that if something should happen to you, they may be held responsible. But if you shut up and then something happens, nobody would seem to know. So I would say the dangers are very real. We cannot say we should all stop doing journalism because of the dangers. But if we get to a level that we have many more people doing journalism that is biting, investigative reporting, they cannot kill all of us. There was a wedding of an investigative journalist in Ghana that myself was there, Anas was there, and a few others. So I said, well, if the government of Ghana drops a bomb on this wedding, there will not be any investigative journalists in Ghana again. Because we have radio stations alone, about 500 radio stations. But if you want to count investigative journalists in Ghana, you can count them on only the fingers of one hand. So if they want to silence the few and then get everybody to shut up, it's quite easy. Then again, let's move towards collaboration. If the story is so dangerous, and you know that only your media house cannot bear the risk, invite other people, 4 media houses, they all blow it up. Where are they going to target and leave who? So in all of this, we should seek to help one another.
Thank you very much, Manasseh. I think the last question was support for journalists. Ajibola, you want to take that? Support available to journalists. I think, was that a question?
Not a question.
No,
Yes.
the person asked, how does he get data for these spendings that the government gives a figure, but that is not the
But
reality
that's
on
not
the
a
ground?
figure on the ground. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, you always encounter that kind of a problem. So there is no way you can run away from that. In fact, what actually defines you as an investigative journalist is the ability to bring out, to ferret out information that other people are trying to hide. Because government officials will always make effort to make sure that they hide information from you. Sometimes they might give you, inadequate information. Sometimes they might not give you at all. But what makes you to be a thoroughbred investigative journalist is to be able to be creative and find different ways you can get that information out. Most of the reports that we have done in my organization, it's not as if the information is just lying there in front of us and we're just using it to do our report. No, there are some we need to even use your opposition to get it. If you know that you're an APC man and you are keeping information about the government, we'll go to the other party that know that could have the same data. Because once an information is with someone, especially if it's a public information, you can be sure that it is not just that person who has that information. Somebody has had that information. So your job as a journalist to be able to, who else could possibly have this information, and go and look out for that information.
Okay.
And you begin to piece them together to do a whole story.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been an amazing session. So this was the COVID-19 Uncovering the Spending session at the 17th African Investigative Journalism Conference here in Abuja. So we'll be having another session later in the day. But this particular session, I myself moderated Jonas Nyabo, multimedia journalist at TFM. We also had Ajibola Amzat from the International Center for Investigative Reporting, Manasseh Awuni Azuri, 4th Estate, Accra. And also joining us online was Joshua Olufemi, Chief Executive of Data Fight, and then Ini Ekot from the Premium Times. So thank you all very much for joining us in-house and also virtually. The next session is at 4:45 p.m. Where we'll be discussing investigating humanitarian and conflict issues or extrajudicial killings. So do join us again around that time. Thank you very much, and see you next time. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Yabo. You've done my job already. Thank you so much, Mr. Manasseh, and everyone on the panel. Of course, Mr. Nigerian journalists, can you literally believe that Mr. Manasseh was given 2 policemen to protect him in Ghana?